Hampstead is one of London's most beautiful neighbourhoods. It lies just 4 miles, or 6.4 kilometres, north of the city centre. It has extensive open spaces, and the summit of Primrose Hill provides a panoramic view of London's distant high buildings. Hampstead is home to celebrities, artists, Russian oligarchs, and other excessively rich residents. It has some of the most expensive housing in London, with more millionaires than any other area of the United Kingdom. For centuries, many of Hampstead's notable residents have chosen to be laid to rest in the ancient churchyard of St. John-at-Hampstead or in Hampstead's Victorian garden cemetery. The story of these 2 burial grounds, their notable occupants, and their remarkable funerary monuments is a tale well worth telling. At the heart of Hampstead village is a church on the site of an ancient monastic settlement. In 986, Ethelred, King of the English, granted Hampstead to the Benedictine monks of Westminster, who built an abbey here. 200 years later, after Henry VIII's religious reformation, the abbey passed into lay hands. Over the centuries, a number of churches have been built here. The current church replaced a medieval building and was consecrated in 1747, extended in 1844, and again extended in 1878. It's a place of worship for Anglicans. When opened, this church was surrounded by an existing burial ground, which now has impressive Georgian and Victorian monuments. It's the final resting place for some noteworthy Hampstead residents. John Constable, the renowned Romantic painter, was interred in this railed chest tomb in 1837. Many of his paintings feature Hampstead Heath and other local scenes. Constable and his family often stayed in Hampstead, and he lived here from 1827 until the end of his life. This monument, like others, is surrounded by decorative railings that had a practical purpose. They kept animals away from monuments and graves, and made it difficult for grave robbers to extract fresh corpses for sale to medical schools for training and research. John Harrison was a carpenter and clockmaker who invented the marine chronometer, a device that greatly increased the safety of long-distance sea travel by enabling accurate calculation of longitude at sea. This chest tomb has details of his life and that of his son William, who assisted his father by testing chronometers on sea voyages and helped him obtain a substantial award from Parliament for his achievements. The tale of that struggle was recounted in the book Longitude, which was serialised for television. Harrison died in 1775, aged 82. The William Hart and Robert Carey chest tomb is embellished with symbols of death and mourning. The most commonly used symbol was the skull and crossbones. The skull represents death, and the crossbones represent resurrection. The Christian belief is the bones will enable the risen dead to stand and look east to see the second coming of Christ. Similar symbols can be seen on John Hodgson's stone memorial. John came from a long-established Hampstead family and was 80 years old when he died in 1858. By the turn of the century, this churchyard was nearly full. A field on the other side of Church Row was purchased, and St. John's Churchyard Extension opened in 1812. Among those buried in the extension is the Franco-British illustrator and writer George du Maurier, known for his work in Punch magazine. He was a grandfather of Daphne du Maurier, author of Rebecca and Jamaica Inn. It bears the inscription, a little trust that when we die, we reap our sowing, and so goodbye. Eva Gore Booth was an Irish poet and dramatist, a suffragette, social worker, and labour activist. She was the younger sister of Constance Gore Booth, later known as the Countess Markievicz, who was imprisoned for taking part in the 1916 Easter Rising against British rule in Ireland. Hugh Greenwood Hammersley, a partner of Cox & Co., bankers and army agents, built this striking tomb for his infant daughter Eve when she died in 1902. It has a larger-than-life bronze statue of an angel cradling and kissing a sleeping girl, presumably Eve. Herbert Beerbohm Tree began acting in the 1870s. He founded RADA, the Royal Academy of Dramatic Arts, and was knighted for his contributions to the theatre. He helped rebuild His Majesty's Theatre and ran it successfully until his death in 1917. Kaye Kendall was an actress, film star and comedienne of the 1950s. In 1955, she began an affair with Rex Harrison while co-starring with him in a film. At the time, he was married to actress Lily Palmer, and when he heard from Kendall's doctor that she had been diagnosed with myeloid leukemia, he arranged with Palmer for them to divorce so that he could marry Kendall and take care of her in her illness. She was 32 when she died in 1959. The graveyard has a columbarium for cremated remains and a garden of remembrance, where the ashes of Randolph Schwab lie beneath this small statue of an angel. Schwab, a draftsman, painter and etcher, was known for his skill in crafting detailed drawings, expertise that was put to good use when he served as a war artist in both World Wars, and when he illustrated books, including Somerset Maugham's Of Human Bondage. The angel's sash bears the legend, Randolph Schwab, in whose life we have seen excellence in beauty. The graveyard has 2 memorials to daughters of soldiers who served during the Crimean War. These were paid for by a Hampstead charity founded in 1855 to nurse, clothe, board and educate the destitute female children, orphans or not, of soldiers born during the service or after the honourable discharge of their father. By the early 1870s, St John's Churchyard extension was nearing full capacity, and the Hampstead Burial Board purchased a 20-acre plot 3/4 of a mile away at Fortune Green. Hampstead Cemetery was opened in 1876 and was later extended by 5 acres in 1901. The cemetery was designed with features similar to those seen in Kensal Green and the other 6 private commercial cemeteries that were launched on the outskirts of London between 1832 and 1841. These commercial cemeteries were authorised by Parliament to address the severe shortage of burial places in London and provide a hygienic alternative to the many nauseating urban graveyards where thousands of corpses were being crammed into grounds already more than full. However, after the arrival of the cemeteries, many old odious graveyards were able to survive because they charged lower fees for plots and burials and were closer to the homes of the mourners. In 1852, the Metropolitan Burial Act forced urban burial grounds in London to close. Some of these were turned into pleasant parks, while others were sold to speculators. The statute also regulated the opening of publicly funded cemeteries. The first 2 public cemeteries to open in 1854 were St Pancras and Islington Cemetery and Marylebone Cemetery. Hampstead's public cemetery opened in 1876. It has a pair of Gothic-style mortuary chapels linked by a central arch. One chapel and consecrated ground was reserved for use by Anglicans. The other chapel and non-consecrated land was reserved for non-Anglicans. The cemetery was conceived not only as a place to dispose of the dead, but also a park-like setting where the living could enjoy rest and recreation. A large number of trees were planted to create a garden setting, and 30 gardeners were employed to keep the cemetery looking its best. Some remarkable monuments can be seen in the cemetery. The most impressive is the Art Deco monument to Martha Bianchi. A stylized sculpture of a female angel raising her hands to heaven looks down on the tomb, and 2 marble relief side panels. Martha Gore was Scottish and an opera singer. Cesare Bianchi was Italian and a top chef. They met and married in 1921. Cesare built this monument for his wife after she died while giving birth to their second child in 1936. This image shows Martha ascending to heaven accompanied by wingless angels. Cesare was interned by the British government as an enemy alien during the Second World War. Released in 1944, he was killed while shopping in Smithfield Market when it was hit by a German V-2 bomb. Another distinctive Art Deco monument is this life-size sculptured church organ of Charles Clifton Barrett. Barrett spent much of his life as a vaudevillian and music hall entertainer. Newspaper reviews declared that he had a mellow baritone voice and perfect comic timing. Though he played several musical instruments in his performances, Barrett was not known to have played the organ. He was 60 when he died in 1929. Bannister Fletcher was an English architect, surveyor, and, briefly, a member of the House of Commons. From 1890, he was Professor of Architecture at King's College London. His monument was designed by his son, Sir Bannister Flight Fletcher, also a noted architect, with whom he co-authored A History of Architecture, now in its 21st edition. It was declared the Book of the Century by the American Institute of Architects. Fletcher died in 1899, aged 66. Grand Duke Michael Mikhailovich was a grandson of Tsar Nicholas I of Russia. He was a colonel in the military during the Russo-Turkish War. After several of his marriage proposals were rejected, he met and married a minor member of the Russian nobility in Nice, without first seeking the necessary permissions of the Tsar and his parents. As a result, he was deprived of his military rank and told never to return to Russia. He spent the rest of his life living in exile in Europe. He and his wife had 2 daughters and a son. His wife died in 1827. 2 years later, when he was 68, he contracted influenza, died, and joined his wife in Hampstead Cemetery. Andrew Fisher was a Scottish coal miner who served 3 terms as Prime Minister of Australia. As a young man, he became interested in trade unionism and continued his union activities after emigrating to Australia in 1885. He became leader of the Australian Labour Party in 1907, and a year later he began his first term as Prime Minister of Australia. After he resigned as Prime Minister in 1915 due to ill health, he became Australian High Commissioner in London. He died in 1928, following an attack of influenza. Joseph Lister was a British surgeon and medical scientist who investigated why 50% of patients died during or after surgery. His research revealed that carbolic and boracic acids could be used as antiseptics to dramatically reduce deaths from surgery and childbirth. He campaigned for safe surgical techniques and preventive medicine. He received many honours and awards in Britain and elsewhere. Queen Victoria honoured him by making him Lord Lister of Lyme Regis. He died in 1912 at the age of 84. With talent and ambition, Matilda Wood blossomed from being a young entertainer in a London tavern to being a global superstar, professionally known as Mary Lloyd. She was a music hall singer, actress and comedienne, and toured Europe and America, earning the highest salary of any entertainer. Her repertoire included risque songs filled with double entendre such as "She'd Never Had Her Ticket Punched Before." One of her popular songs was "When I Take My Morning Promenade."
As I take my morning promenade, quite a pleasant card on the promenade. Now I don't mind nice boys staring hard, if it satisfies their desire. Do you think my dress is a little bit, just a little bit, not too much of it? If it shows my shape just a little bit, that's a little bit the boys admire.
Lloyd had a turbulent private life, married 3 times and divorced twice. She suffered from ill health and became alcohol dependent. In 1922, she became ill on stage and died a few days later, aged 52. More than 50,000 people attended her funeral. But despite her popularity as a performer, she died penniless. Another entertainer, Ardath de Salles-Steen, a young American dancer, was crossing the Atlantic in 1928 on her way to see her sister on the London stage when she became ill. After undergoing an emergency operation, she died on board ship. As a young child, Charles Forty emigrated with his parents from a small village in Italy to Scotland. He began his career working for his father running cafes, and went on to create a multi-billion-pound worldwide chain of restaurants and more than 800 hotels. He was knighted in 1970 and became Baron Forte of Ripley in 1982. He died in 2007 and lies here with his parents and other family members. Numerous Celtic crosses indicate the many Scottish families buried in the cemetery, and inscriptions reveal the intense loss when children die young. Military servicemen and women who died during the First and Second World Wars and are buried in the cemetery are commemorated by a Commonwealth Cross of Sacrifice. A civilian war memorial is surrounded by the graves of Hampstead residents also killed during the 2 World Wars. Hampstead Cemetery is the final resting place for an estimated 60,000 people, and the number continues to grow. Today, Islington and Camden Cemetery Services manage Hampstead Cemetery and sell plots and provide funeral services and welcome cremated remains in a garden of remembrance. As with all old, large burial grounds, the never-ending challenge is keeping nature under control and preserving buildings, monuments and gravestones. The Heritage Lottery Fund has assisted these efforts with contributions, and a local volunteer group, the Friends of Hampstead Cemetery, has also provided support. London has several wonderful burial grounds well worth visiting. These include St. John-at-Hampstead graveyard and Hampstead Cemetery. They offer visitors opportunities to discover marvellous monuments, stunning sculptures, and intriguing inscriptions, and a peek into the lives of those who now silently slumber in a peaceful garden setting.